And I think Dream Theater probably has one of the best fans in the world. Like, just
best and worst.
Well, how so?
Well, best because they are so fanatical and so devoted and so passionate.
Yeah.
But with that also comes so critical.
Right.
Very critical, very demanding, very opinionated.
Sorry in advance, guys. Many of you know I love Dream Theater. They're extremely influential on me, both as a listener and an artist. You'll find a ton of videos on my channel singing the praises of this band. So as we proceed with this review, I'd love for everyone watching to keep that in mind. This is coming from a place of love. I was taught to show respect through honesty, not infantilizing those around me, not placing a person on a pedestal, and certainly not sugarcoating or hiding the truth so I can extract assets from someone else for my own personal gain. If you've just been to the NAMM show, you're probably all too familiar with that feeling. So this review of Dream Theater's latest record, Parasomnia, are my honest thoughts, hopefully towards the interest of better insight for both the artist and audience, yielding better music in the future. I'm quite snarky by nature, as many of you are familiar. Towards the interest of actually being heard, I will do my best to set aside that today. These are my opinions on Parasomnia, and I'd love to know yours in the comments below as we journey through this video together. Sharing our experiences with one another is how we better understand the truth about music, and I'd love to take that journey with you. Also, I'll be referring to several time codes in each song. I encourage you, if possible, to listen to the different sections of the album along with this review so you have better context. But first, so recently they've been trying to ban TikTok in the US for harvesting user data. I gotta say, their data mining practices were pretty egregious, but it's got many people asking how this is any different than every other social media company. It's a pretty wild ecosystem we operate in right now. For instance, you or I could go to any data broker's website right now and buy anyone's data for a couple of bucks. Seriously. The most wild part of all of this is it's 100% legal just to purchase people's data. You combine that with how shoddy the security is at many of these big companies, and it seems like every day there's another headline of some ubiquitous service getting hacked. Your personal information is being sold on the dark web to spammers, scammers, and identity thieves who can target you, and they face zero repercussions from it. It's pretty infuriating that these companies basically have no standards for how to handle our data. So now I have to be interrupted 5 times a day by a bot in Serbia who is trying to tell me my Microsoft account is compromised. Thanks. It's really on us to protect ourselves. So that's why you should use today's sponsor, Aura. Aura keeps you safe online by doing what the big companies refuse to do. They will identify data brokers who are selling your information and submit opt-out requests on your behalf. After just a few weeks, you'll stop seeing your information on these sites when you search yourself, which will lead to less spam. Aura also continuously monitors the dark web and alerts you if they find your personal information exposed. They let you know fast if anyone tries to use this information to access things like your credit or your bank accounts. Plus, they give you up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case scenario happen. The Aura app also has a VPN with over 100 virtual locations to help keep that information from getting mined in the first place. Compare your current VPN with how robust this offer is from Aura. When I did, I was very impressed, and I feel much more secure knowing that Aura has me covered with more than just location data. You can go to my link in the description, that's aura.com/becomethenight, that's night with a K, to try Aura free for 14 days. And 14 days is enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed. Get protected and stay protected with Aura. Again, use my link in the description, that's aura.com/becomethenight for 14 days free. All right, let's get back to it. All right, let's just start with a little overview. Parasomnia, Dream Theater's latest album entry, is a concept record. Now, not in the traditional sense with a story and continuity of characters, but thematically it touches on a bunch of weird sleeping disorders.
The album starts with the listener going to sleep, and then over the next 70 minutes, you experience what the listener's going through in his dreams with all these different, nighttime activities, and then the album ends with the listener waking up. So basically the entire album is what's happening while the listener or the character in the album is asleep.
Think of it like a collection of stories from like the Lovecraftian universe, each one self-contained. I describe the album as business as usual. Some fans will celebrate that since this is the glorious return of the original member, Mike Portnoy, saying that it feels like Dream Theater picked up where they left off. And you even hear this from Petrucci and Portnoy themselves.
I think a lot of people, I mean, I've seen this just online with even when the singles came out, a lot of people are saying this feels like a continuation of Black Clouds.
Right.
They say that it feels like a natural continuation from where they last left off, and that it was second nature collaborating again. My overall thoughts on the record, it's okay, I guess. There's very little here I haven't heard from Dream Theater before. It certainly doesn't sound like they made themselves uncomfortable at all on this album. If you're a regular Dream Theater enjoyer, this is an incredibly comfortable, familiar, reliable album. I'd almost describe this album as Dream Theater playing the hits, and not in the sense of them playing songs you enjoy, but using familiar cadences, rhythms, and phrasings we've grown accustomed to hearing from them over the last 2 decades or so. And Dream Theater themselves are fully aware of this, quoting Mike Portnoy from his interview with Drumeo.
There were so many moments that just felt so familiar. It felt like, oh man, this feels like As I Am, or this feels like Pull Me Under, or this feels like Panic Attack. Like, there's just a certain sound and style that these 5 people make. I mean, we made so many albums together. We've done so many shows together that there's just a built-in chemistry, and it's natural. Anytime a riff would come out, oh, it kind of reminds me of Pull Me Under, it kind of reminds me of this, whatever. Rather than denying it and fighting it, we embraced it. We were like, you know what? We're like 40 years into our career here. This is our sound. It's the Popeye mentality. I am what I am, you know? This is who we are.
Take it or leave it.
Yeah, and we weren't going to fight it, like if it sounds a little bit like this song or that song from the catalog, it's like, this is who we are.
That's what people love.
Let's not fight it. Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to come back to this after we've looked at the track by track. I think it's important for context, but to quickly opine on it, this overfamiliarity did not make me excited. The album really didn't surprise me much, which is the foundation of entertainment. For those who love indulging in Dream Theater nostalgia, I think you'll thoroughly enjoy this album. In totality, there were moments where I felt engaged and I was getting lost in the moment, and I'm excited to talk about those parts on the track by track, but it rarely lasted longer than a moment before my suspension of disbelief was interrupted by either a Dream Theater cliche or an unsatisfying moment of disunity. I do want to take a moment to highlight John Petrucci's solos. There are some great solos on this record. I don't think any of them rise to being his best, but most of them were quite enjoyable, and I'd love to hear them again. They are usually the highlight of every track. All right, let's do the track by track call-outs. Just a quick note, I'll make a dedicated section for James Labrie in lyrics, so these track by track breakdowns won't go usually into a lot of depth or great detail on that stuff. The first track, In the Arms of Morpheus. This is the overture of the record, which I assumed was the case on the first listen. Dream Theater have done a few overtures in the past, and the structure and transitions of this song follow that same formula. This actually may be my favorite track on the album, weirdly enough. It starts out with some cool cinematic sound design-y stuff symbolizing the protagonist going to sleep. I really enjoyed the sound design here. About a minute or so in, we introduce what I'm lovingly referring to as the Dream Theater Godfather theme. It's a nice theme. I like that they return to it throughout the album. It's one of the more identifiable and memorable melodies on the record. 30 seconds later, the track starts kind of drooping or melting into an angular, whole tone-esque kind of creepy riff. This intrigued me and gave me hope for the rest of the record. At a minute 50, the riff drops with this screaming response contrast that is super dense, dissonant, and dope. At this point on my first listen, I was starting to salivate. This felt fresh and cool, especially for Dream Theater. Haven't quite been in this territory before, but it was definitely Dream Theater. Really cool pacing and development of the idea, then it just kind of drops into another random riff. This is when I knew, okay, this is an overture. On a typical track, I wouldn't really love this transition, Not the most creative or elegant way of getting from point A to point B, but knowing it's an overture, you can kind of give these things a little more grace. From here, we're treated to some pretty standard Dream Theater fare. The drive of the section is good. It does bring some anticipation and foreshadowing of what to expect on the record. Around 4 minutes, Petrucci comes in with a feature, and this is some of my favorite articulation he's used in a long time. Overall, on this record, I feel like I can better hear the detail of his solo performances, like there's more detail in the tone or mix. I can hear his fingers more, truly excellent emoting. The theme itself feels like it could be off of Systematic Chaos or The Astonishing, which are two records I will be referencing throughout this review. The arrangement of block piano chords and John's guitar solo over top and a hi-hat that almost sounds like a tambourine. This has been done so much by Dream Theater that it loses its punch for me. It is a classic arena ballad sound, but it doesn't really have its own unique identity amongst their catalog. Playing more with timbres and mixing here for the backing instruments, I think, would have gone a long way towards separating it from other things they've done before, or even trying some different piano phrasing or voice leading. Maybe to some fans this signals, yes, the boys are back together, but that's like near the bottom of my cares as a listener. Even with the complaints of how cliche it all is, John Petrucci's performance still cuts through all of that and truly elevates this moment. Oh, and at 4:45, when John does the guitar harmonies, that felt totally awesome. I know it's not something they can pull off live, but man, do I love hearing it. I personally don't care if they have to fly tracks in to harmonize. It sounds sick. All right, the next track, Night Terror. This is the first song they wrote when Portnoy returned, and it is also the first single they released. When I first listened to it, I really didn't care for it at all. Weirdly enough, I actually appreciate Night Terror more in context of it being after the overture. That was a pleasant surprise. However, the rest of the track was mostly humdrum to me. I want to bring up a few quotes from some recent Dream Theater interviews talking about Night Terror.
It just sounded like classic Dream Theater. It sounded like you take any of those older albums that this lineup made, and this fits right in with it.
You released a single, Night Terror, from the upcoming album, and like I told you in the car, like it feels like it's almost a fan service of a song. It like has everything that anyone would want from a Dream Theater song.
I totally agree with those statements, and that's kind of why I was bored. One of the big things I fell in love with Dream Theater for was how daring and different they were. You could hear a really cool evolution from album to album over several decades while maintaining a distinct identity. The Black Clouds record has also never really interested me that much, and I agree with fans that it feels like this album picks right back up where Black Clouds left off, especially on this track. That over familiarity, which subverts surprise, again, the foundation of entertainment, paired with the bloat of the runtime and unsatisfying transitions, the whole thing just kind of felt unnecessary, like I was wasting my time. I can get better versions of this same thing on the older records for a fraction of my time. There are parts I liked about this track, and I'll touch on those, but let's start from the top. I really like the creepy, opaque phrase and tone at the top of this track. As a single, I didn't love the phrase, but in context of the whole album, I think it fits. Then the first drop of the riff happens, and I'm a little disappointed. It's like someone else entirely mixed this track compared to the last one. The drums aren't as punchy, the snare sample is creating phasing issues, and the guitar tone really isn't mixed that great. Specifically with the guitar tone, let me show you what I mean. All right, so I got this little sample here from Night Terror, and I have the Cornif AIP, that's the Amplified Instrument Processor, pulled up. It has this little guy called the Insufferable Mid-Range Filter that you can use to duck out the whistles in guitars. Let's just listen to it first without. Now with it on. Off. On. It takes out some of that way up there, that obnoxious whistle. This is going to potentially be very unpleasant on your ears, so you might want to turn your volume down here. If we hit the listen button and hit playback, that's what I'm pulling out. So if you hear that way up there, with it off and on. Honestly, I could probably, because I'm only at -3 dB only. That's a lot. I could pull out more. I could probably get away with like a -4 easily. On. Off. Now, it's going to reduce some of the excitement of the overall track because this is just a master. It's not just on the guitars. It's also pulling some of that out of the cymbals, and you want that in the cymbals, which is really another point at how not amazing the mix is, because like with certain cymbals and certain parts of the overheads, that 3.3K in the guitars is clashing with those, and it's just making a lot of buildup in that area that probably needs to be surgically removed a little more. Compare this mix with the mix on Systematic Chaos or Octavarium. They are better separated and tighter. The drums sound more natural too. The mix on Night Terror was definitely a letdown. My guess is they wanted it to feel more aggressive and raw, and there's ways to accomplish that without doing whatever this is. Last Will and Testament by Opeth is a shining example of this, keeping it natural and raw, but sonically extremely pleasing and interesting. The long extended opening is really just a showcase for Mike Portnoy announcing his return. Like, I get it, but removing the context of him rejoining the band, and it definitely drags. It fits better in context of the whole album, but still makes me wait to get to the meat. The main riff at 134 just feels too familiar for me to care. When they break up that riff for the verse, that fun syncopation works really well, especially how the tail of the riff is like an octave pull off and then a down pick on the lower octave, placing the strongest transients of that tail on the upbeats of 16th notes. It's really nice, dancey, groovy. The top line across the whole track, again, is just very familiar. I couldn't be bothered to compare it to previous Dream Theater songs. I've done that before. An honest evaluation of Dream Theater's catalog just bears this out, that is just very familiar. The chorus top line sounds like it was written by late 80s Def Leppard. It's okay, it's identifiable. It doesn't really have the bite or emoting I'd love to see here. Maybe a more compelling vocal performance and mix would pull me in. Between the vocal production, arranging, and mixing, the entire chorus feels kind of softened. They try to widen the chorus with open guitar chords and piano block chords. Considering all the previous times I've heard Dream Theater do this, literally on the last song, I just don't think it's all that compelling. These sections might feel different with better sound design, but I want to save that conversation for the production section of the video. At 347, we do the most Portnoy thing ever. He does this metric modulation that was really cool and different like 20 years ago or more. These days, it just feels a little played out to me. Here's a clip of Mike talking about it here.
You'll hear in that song, there's a lot of me turning the beat around kind of thing, which is one of the things I love to do. You take a musical rhythm or a musical riff or whatever, and then I'll try 3 or 4 different grooves underneath it to twist it and turn it. And
it's a re-presentation of the same trick we've been hearing for decades. I don't really get amped hearing it anymore. The section of the bridge from 524 to 559 could be removed entirely with nothing lost, and this is borne out in the radio edit of the track. They actually cut more of that track than I would have. It's fairly straightforward. You could develop the drum part there a little differently. Same riff focus across everything, but like just a little bit of tailoring of the arrangement at that transition, and that would so easily work, and you don't miss the other part at all. From 637 to 657, that could also be cut with nothing being lost. First, I'm going to just show you just connecting the two sections together, just deleting the stuff that was there before. And then I'm going to show you, like, just adding a simple snare fill can make these two sections flow way easier together. Something that simple. Like, that's not bad. But then throw this guy up. Just snare. It's not a mixed snare, it's just something really quickly slapped together to get the idea across, but like, even just a little because you already have the like really emphasized and utilized in the guitar and keyboards, that then bringing the snare into that dense, that fast of notes will just really quickly take us to the next section, really effortlessly, honestly. I also want to emphasize, I really enjoyed these two sections I just connected together. Some of my favorite parts on this track. At 7:15, we have this very rush sounding riff that also just doesn't need to be there. The prior section is this awesome tension maker that is begging to head to a guitar solo. John's solo on this track is cool and creative. It's not my first choice, but it's certainly different than your average Petrucci solo, and it's executed fantastically. I could totally be wrong, but I get the feeling that John made this solo section first and added the Rush section afterwards to justify it in the flow. Connecting the solo to the previous high tension section is doable, but it might take a little bit of work. I quickly came up with 2 options here. So this first part, I just kind of chopped stuff out, and it kind of works. That's fine. Nothing crazy. On the other side here, I shortened up that first section a little bit, and my thought process was, on this last bit, just have everything drop out except the guitars, and then have it go right into the solo. Drop. Just like everything shuts up except the guitar and keyboard there, doing that harmony thing. 803 is a great example of transitions that just kind of seem like they were added in because John wanted a big open ballad solo section, and they needed something to justify getting from point A to point B when they are completely different. It comes across as more utilitarian than organic, like they would have been fine with anything being there as long as it was theoretically sound. And they're hoping it's flashy enough and moves by quickly enough that people don't ask too many questions. That ballady solo is supposed to connect us back to the chorus. It does connect well, but I still don't know if it's really necessary. The TLDR on Night Terror, if the album track is 10 minutes and your radio edit is 6 minutes, you probably don't actually need that 4 minutes at all. Next track, we have A Broken Man. I absolutely love this opening riff. It goes on a few bars too long without enough of the right kinds of contrast, but it's still a really cool idea with some great punch in the performances. It's 36 seconds long, and it probably should be between 15 and 20 seconds long. It goes into this octave riff to establish the rhythmic motif, then evolves into the main cadence of the track. This whole affair could be cut down fairly substantially. I would definitely change the pacing of the drum parts through the intro, but the general idea of the length and the cadence gets across here. Seamlessly goes right into it. Seamlessly goes right into it. And even if you wanted, you could add this guy back here. This little guy, if you wanted to add him at the end. That little flat 9 kind of guy. I do like the section that establishes the cadence. Moody, groovy, ominous, cool sonic picture. Evolving the riff and drum part from tom to more kick snare oriented backbeat feels really nice. It probably could be trimmed up a few seconds, but that's more of a nitpick. The 11/8 meter in the verse is just annoying. I'm grooving to this 6/4 motion with cool chugs that could make you lean into the downbeat, and you throw off the downbeat because why? Other than just trying to be different, why did you do that? I was enjoying that, and you upset the groove. I really didn't care for the chorus. Firstly, it feels more like a pre-chorus, both in tension building and tonality, but this also falls again into that overly familiar Dream Theater sound. The cadence has been used a lot. The melody is very familiar, and I get that it's like revisiting the Godfather theme from the overture, but I mean, besides that, I think it actually reminds me of Lord Nefarious because of the cadence and top line. So I just attached these two songs together in a not sophisticated, elegant, or good way, but you'll get the idea of what I was hearing. The only thing I did was pitch up the Lord Nefarious track a semitone. That's it. The chorus top line does stick out to me, but not because I liked it. It's really more because it feels almost aesthetically out of place with the rest of the track. The second verse is kind of Tool-ish. I dig it. There's some grit on James's vocals here that's appealing. 404, we have something like a proper pre-chorus. It intrigued me. I wish the backing vocals here had a little more emoting in them that would really pull the whole section together. Emotionally, they're a little flat and disinterested, like a scientist trying to be an objective observer of an experiment. But it sets up the chorus better than the first one. 449 is one of my favorite moments on the album. That's such a dorky keys patch, but the phrase, the portamento on the patch, and how he uses the pitch wheel is so damn satisfying. And it sets up a really cool counterpoint with the guitar while the drums brutally hold down the groove. Then at 507, we get another one of these Portnoy metric mods that just seems honestly unnecessary. I was really enjoying seeing how this phrase could evolve over this backbeat, and you just switched up the backbeat for whatever reason. 517 is an organ solo. Just ditch it. Just get right to the proper key solo. Literally nothing is missed here.
No one's gonna miss this whatsoever. This, I think, is one of the more seamless transitions. I think that cut feels way better instantly than the album cut.
553 is a super cool, groovy section, kind of like Toto, and that has absolutely no business being on this song. This is the perfect example of writing for play and not writing for aesthetic depth. This has absolutely nothing to do emotionally with the subject matter of the song. It does not emotionally resonate with the words broken man. It's like the musical equivalent of It's very Liquid Tension, and that's great and all. I also understand the rule of cool, but at a certain point, there has to be a coherency to the piece, and this neither calls back nor points us forward to a different perspective on the same subject. It's just random. Totally giving me these vibes.
Hi everyone, I'm new. Holds up, Spork. My name is Katie, but you can call me Te Penguin of Doom. Lol. As you can see, I'm very random. That's why I came here. To meet random people like me. I'm 13 years old. I'm mature for my age, though. I like to watch Invader Zim with my girlfriend. I'm bi. If you don't like it, deal with it.
Next, let's talk about Dead Asleep. According to interviews, this is John Petrucci's favorite track on the album. We revisit the same guitar tone and phrasing from the beginning of the overture. Same with the Godfather theme, now played on a very fake-sounding violin patch. Suspension of disbelief is one of the most taken-for-granted aspects of music. The moment I hear a patch that reminds me of an N64 sound font, I'm kinda out. I imagine this section is less a proper composition and more acting as thematic album glue. It moves to the main riff of the song in a mildly off-putting way, but in this case, the off-put kind of works well towards the demented, ominous aesthetic of the whole album. It does feel fairly familiar, though I liked this riff more than most of the other ones on this album anyway. Not totally exciting for me, but at least I was interested to hear more. When the guitar is out there on its own in this song, I'm reminded again of this guitar mix. It's basically the same guitar mix from Night Terror, but the roughness of that 3.3K complements the lower register better. Here's some things I would do differently.
Okay, so now we have a more isolated guitar part here on Dead Asleep, and this gives me the opportunity to do a little bit more than just remove the 3.3K. Now, again, this is the entire master, so it's going to be affecting the drums and the bass and all the other stuff as well. But just like picture it with just affecting the guitars. So I'm going to do before. And now let's do after with some processing. It's more managed in those upper mids, but it's also quite excited, and it has a little more grip, and it has a little more low end to it. First thing I did was just pull stuff out with the Cornef AIP. So it's AIP on. I could probably go even stronger than that. And then I added this really cool thing from Cornef called Wow Thing. Instantly gets this cool widening effect, gets this beautiful excitement, and it also gives it a little low end. Then I added some saturation from, I think it's Kazrog True Iron. And then it was still yelling quite a lot up here at like almost 4K, so I ducked that just a hair. Again, before. That's not really a great example because I'm doing it post all of the mastering stuff. I'm doing it post hitting any mix buses. I would like to get in there and be way more surgical with the original guitar tracks. That would make this come across so much better. But that's just like a quick slap together example of something I would do to give this a little more excitement, a little bit more transience, a little bit more depth.
Through this main riff, Portnoy does another one of these metric mods to change the backbeat. This is really cool here, especially feeling how the rhythmic relationship of the tail of the riff changes. It would be way more effective, in my humble opinion, if he saved the first time he does a backbeat metric modulation for this part of the album, because at this point in the album, it almost makes me want to roll my eyes until we hit the tail of that riff. It then moves to a section with phaser on the guitar and another open ballady solo section. We could remove both of these and, again, lose nothing.
You can literally just delete the section, honestly. I would change the drum arrangement connecting these two sections, but it really wouldn't need much. Just something with more notes in the drum part, basically around the shells, that would signal that we're about to get amped up in energy and pace in the next section. Like, I just threw in this dorky little snare thing. I don't think that's the actual answer, but just like as an idea of just like pull us back in the slingshot to get shot out in the next section.
The verse is fine, not particularly memorable, but I mean, it fills the space. It gets us to the chorus. The chorus, like Broken Man, feels more like a pre-chorus, especially with the mode change and backbeat. It is a memorable top line, but it again feels very familiar, like I've heard it a bunch of times before. After the chorus, I'd cut that main riff recall in half and just keep the part that has the 6/8 swing. At 440 in the second verse, when we stick to the 5th degree in the top line, you can really hear how James has aged. His delivery just doesn't have the projection and conviction like he had in the past, and the pitch is a bit flat on some notes. There's really not a lot you can do about that. People get older and their voices change. Going from the end of the second verse with the lyrics, "a shockingly violent act," we've changed the density and backbeat of the drum part, which works. I think it could use maybe like an ascending melodic tail to the whole section on the guitar to connect us more smoothly back to the second chorus. It has a tail that's fairly similar to the other tails in the verse. I think this tail could distinguish itself a bit more and add a little more momentum going into the chorus. The beginning of the bridge is a highlight for me. I really enjoyed this section. I like how neutral the guitar part is harmonically over top of how colorful the keys are by comparison. I dig the cadence and voice leading, and particularly the drum backbeat is a little ambiguous. You could feel it nicely in either 3/8 or the halftime swing of 6/8. It's not really halftime, but it like kind of feels halftime. And it works. The secret is how Mike is using the hi-hat there. Eventually he settles on double time, which leads better into the solo section. The following Petrucci solo is excellent. Great phrasing and articulation. At a certain point, I have to wonder if both solos are necessary. The section drags a bit, maybe making each of them half as long. Rudess also does a great solo, but I don't know, maybe the wow factor just becomes less when you know what these guys are capable of. I like ending the track with the main riff modulated up. It adds a cool tension harmonically, especially with Rudess adding the diminished chords at the top of the phrase. And the way Petrucci develops the motif out of there is also cool. Could maybe mix it up a little, both with the cadence and melodic rhythm, but those are nitpicks. We exit the track on the Godfather theme again. I don't know that it's necessary. Maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like forced continuity. The track is already 11 minutes. I would definitely err on the side of keeping things more lean. Next track is Midnight Messiah. This is the Metallica worship track on the album. The intro lick is fine, but at a certain point, it feels like we've heard it 3 times on this record. I think there could be a more distinguishing way of beginning the track, either by moving the phrasing away from 8th note arpeggiation or just missing the guitar altogether. It also reminds me of the post-solo bridge in Repentance between the arrangement and the random spoken word clips.
That's why I'm like I'm trapped. I keep thinking that I'm waking up, but I'm still in a dream. It seems like it's going on forever. I can't get out of it. I don't want to wake up for real. How do you...
Until that moment, I never felt like I'd failed at anything. And I felt like I failed her. I failed myself.
Yeah, the whole first minute and 22, I would ditch and just start from scratch. I didn't care about that development at all. At 122, we get the main riff. It almost feels like a slower version of the main riff from Night Terror. It's both overly familiar within the album itself and the greater Dream Theater catalog. 143 sounds a lot like the chorus riff from Cyanide by Metallica.
Suicide, I've already died. You're just a funeral I've been waiting.
I don't know how else to describe it other than the top line on pretty much this whole song feels corny, like super white. Let's just throw this on screen.
Last time, thought I lost my mind. How the hell did I end up here?
The chorus is a little on the nose in a classic thrash way. The top line rhythm is Metal Militia, and the rhythm of the riff is also similar.
Midnight Messiah. Darkness descends.
There's still something cool and appealing about it, even though it's a little dorky and on the nose. It's one of the more memorable moments on the album, I think, because it does aesthetically differentiate itself more than other parts of the album. And I like the ending of the chorus too. Through the next round of verse, chorus, it's basically rinse and repeat with a few arrangement differences. Nothing to note here that I haven't already. I think we can delete the first part of the bridge. The solo section in the track is one of the best on the album. We can definitely get there sooner.
Now, I think this could use a more interesting drum transition, but this pretty much works as is, honestly. Just a little bit of nuancing the drum part, I think, would tie these perfectly. Nothing missed. We get to one of the best solos on the entire record.
The cadence in the solo section is super fun, reminds me of some of my favorite classic metal moments, really sick modulations, good development of the drum parts. I love the tapping part at the end. You rarely hear John do moves like that, but it's very fun to hear him change it up some. The voice leading kind of raises the air in your lungs to like the top of your chest. It really lifts you and builds this cool anticipation with some anxiousness. You could probably trim it up by a few bars, but that's a nitpick. Then we're back to the pre-chorus and the chorus. Pretty straightforward track structure-wise. Arguably the most concise track on the album, clocking in at just under 8 minutes. The next track, Are We Dreaming? This is really more of a sound designy concept record sound collage. It's cool, and I like it. I think they executed it very well. Pleasing on my ears, intriguing, well-balanced. I don't mind it being on here, but I would caution that it could mislead a listener. Like I mentioned at the top, this album isn't a concept record with a strict continuity.
Parasomnia is a bit of a concept album. It's not a proper concept album with like a story and characters the way Scenes from Memory was, or maybe like Operation Mindcrime. This is more of a thematic concept album like Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon or something. Basically, all the songs have a common thread and a common theme, but each one of them is, different from each other and different stories.
When you include tracks like this without enough context from supplemental materials like liner notes or interviews, it could give the impression that this is a continuous story. That's the signal that I picked up when I first heard it. Between constantly revisiting the Godfather theme across the whole album and then just an entire track that's a sound collage with some semantic information, I thought this was a clue into where we were in the story and other characters I should probably be paying attention to. But that isn't the case. I'm actually not 100% sure what the purpose of this track is, other than just being nifty and cool. And it is. I mean, it's neat. I liked it. I just wanted to mention that it threw me off the first time I listened to it. The next track is Bend the No, I said Bend the Are you serious? This may actually be my favorite track on the album, even though I don't even love it the entire way through. The guitar tone and phrasing distinguishes the track from every other track on this album. You can lean more into the tone and the nuance of the performances. It breathes a little more. Very pretty voicings in that intro. The lyrics on the whole track are pretty cringe, I gotta say. I died a little inside the first time I heard them. It's comprised almost exclusively of cliches. 129 is probably my favorite riff of the entire album, which is weird because it's like so simple and so like old school and classic. You feel like you've heard it everywhere, right? The following top line that complements it just follows the guitar melody, but oddly it's the part that was most memorable for me on this album. The whole track is definitely filled with some pretty strong cheese, and it'd be less so if the lyrics weren't so blech. But I don't know. I can enjoy some cheese like this. At 3:17, we had a section that reminds me a little too much of Ministry of Lost Souls. They're both in the same key. They both hang on the 4 and move to the minor 4 and then resolve to the 6. It transitions right into a great, simple John Petrucci solo. The cadence of that section at 3:52 feels a little weird to me, but it's whatever. It goes back to what I assume is our hyper cheesy chorus and exits on an extended John Petrucci solo. There's some great expressive articulation here. It definitely feels like an improv solo as opposed to written. I imagine they'll probably extend that section out live and really let John dig into it. People seem to highly praise this solo. I liked it, but I didn't love it. The pacing of the phrasing was the only thing I didn't really love. That happens in improv, so it's not a critique. It's really just a taste thing. The whole vibe reminds me of the solo from Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. Portnoy mentioned it reminds him of Comfortably Numb. It definitely calls strongly to Pink Floyd and Gilmour, and I really appreciated that. Especially considering the lack of variety in arranging and style throughout this album. This change was very welcome and felt appropriate for the tension and flow of the track. In the last track, the Shadow Man incident. Look, I'll be completely honest, this video is already insanely long, and this track is not worth the amount of time it takes to listen to it without having to dissect it. You could cut this track in half and it'd still be too long. There are some cool moments in it, but not enough to justify the runtime. My opinion and feedback is that it's too long. Make it shorter and more focused, please. Thanks. Okay, so tying all of this together, from a band that flies the flag of progressive metal, it seems more and more with each album they mean progressive based upon sonic standards set by them and their priors, instead of actually pushing the envelope when it comes to the definition of music or the definition of the genre.
I think a lot of the prog music is sometimes maybe too old school or too much keyboards, whereas with Dream Theater, it's very contemporary sounding, very modern, very heavy, and I think that's why Dream Theater, the band's success, has kind of elevated beyond a lot of the other prog scene.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the case anymore. This stuff was new and exciting for a while, like a few decades ago. And for fans who are just discovering Dream Theater for the first time, maybe it's new and exciting to them now. But there's a ton of prog music that has been created since this sound was first established, probably with Scenes from a Memory, which was released in 1999. I don't think comparing yourselves to prog dinosaurs is a particularly useful measurement of how modern you are. And it kind of shows on this record. From what I can tell, every member had a total blast making this record, and I'm so happy for them. Making music you love and that inspires you is such a satisfying and exciting feeling. And seeing all the extreme positivity from fans must be incredibly gratifying. If you're into nostalgia and things that are familiar, things that sound very much like other music you've enjoyed before, I think that kind of Dream Theater fan will love this. I'm not particularly interested in hearing it again myself. The glaring realization I had on the 4th spin of this record was that a lot of the transitions within each song don't really feel inspired to me. I don't mean the transitions between tracks, I mean between section to section in each song. This is actually worth taking some time to examine on its own because I feel like it's one of the primary reasons the album doesn't work for me. If we take the term inspired classically, if you think about it, which is like gifted to man by the Spirit, being a conduit for the Spirit, many of the transitions feel mechanical, almost utilitarian, like the transitions were merely a means to an end, as if there wasn't a clear vision for what needed to go here. I equate it to like a combat engineer trying to figure out the quickest and most effective way of building a bridge to cross a river. The transitions felt closer to being the machinations of man than they did acting as a conduit for the Spirit. In my later listens, being more familiar with what to expect, I can see how the theory is like solid and grounded, the science for how the pieces fit using the transitions, but it certainly doesn't ring true immediately. And by ring true, I mean naturally and effortlessly expressed with genuine passion, as though it's always existed, but you're hearing it for the first time. It kind of felt like there was a collection of cool ideas Dream Theater had, and the challenge was to figure out how to tie them all together, because if we can find the theoretical way of tying these disparate ideas together through unorthodox theory, then we can justify the length of these tracks. To quote Harry S. Plinkett,
"You see, a guy named William Shakespeare once said, 'Brevity is the soul of wit.' This just means don't waste my time."
All right, let's talk about the production. The production on this album was okay. The mix wasn't horrible, but I wouldn't call it great. It's more than passable. It's a little rough around the edges. Your average listener isn't going to pick up on that. They are, however, going to notice how samey most of the sonic space is from track to track. One of the reasons why Bend the Clock is such a breath of fresh air is because you aren't constantly being punished with 3.3K on the guitars for 11 minutes per track. The EQ contour of the track was remarkably different from every other track. This album could have used a little more variety. I think what really would have helped this album more than anything is less focus on how many things can we stuff into something and still call it a song, and more focus on the following 3 things. First, having a clear vision before starting production. Quoting my good friend Clayton, begin with the end in mind. In order to do that, you have to have something that you want to say, a specific message you want to convey, but also keeping in mind how you want your audience to feel after listening to it. This kind of just feels like a bunch of guys who like making relatively esoteric music together and wanted to justify the deeper meaning post hoc. Music does have inherent meaning to it, not semantic meaning, but a more ambiguous, almost squishier meaning that's just as important. What the greater meaning of the message of the whole piece is in context together, aka the whole album, will exclude certain creative decisions and demand others. It's totally fine if you guys just have fun making esoteric music with your friends, but that lack of focus and intention will usually lead a more surface level aesthetic result. It may be really complex, fast moving aesthetic, but it won't have a lot of depth. It's basically the music equivalent of this. It looks really neat. There are tons of cascading counterpunctual patterns that are stimulating, but there's no deeper meaning to it. It appeals to the carnal and instinctual emotions without being holistically meaningful. Put simply, it looks neat. Second, focus way more on timbre instead of dense composition. I'm not saying you can't have dense composition, only that you guys have that well in the bag. It's rare to get a truly delicious sound design from Dream Theater. Mixing and sound design, a huge component of timbre, is like at least half the battle of making your album good to listen to. You guys love Pink Floyd, and understandably so. The thing that made Pink Floyd amazing wasn't really the compositions, it was the sound design and arranging. Most of the songs at a content level are extremely simple and fairly unremarkable. What makes them magical and leap out of the speakers to pull you into their world, also known as a suspension of disbelief, is how pleasing, novel, and intuitive the sound design is. 2 excellent examples I think you guys would appreciate on different ends of the spectrum would be Road Salt 1 by Pain of Salvation, and then Opeth's latest entry, Last Will and Testament. The instruments leap out of the speakers. The sound design on Parasomnia was mostly pretty flat. It has some dynamic range, but not a ton in most of the instruments. I doubt that's a mastering issue. I'm willing to bet the more drawn out repetitive sections of the album would hit so much harder and sicker and pull people almost into a meditative state if they had the sound design absolutely delicious. And third, I would say broaden your frame of reference. You may come back at me and say, we did start with the end in mind. Why do you think I went to John Williams and Wagner? Why do you think I tried to pull all of these different ideas of how to make things sound dreamy?
We went in with this parasomnia theme that I'd come up with and presented to everybody about having a record, you know, where everything was tied in lyrically to all the sleep disturbances.
You looked at John Williams when it comes to chords, cadence, and tonality, but a massive part of the musical experience is dynamics and timbre, especially sound envelope. The same chord voicings performed by an orchestra are not going to translate emotionally one-to-one with a metal band ensemble. There are a lot of cool ways to accomplish very complex and nuanced emotions in a rock ensemble, and broadening the band's frame of reference for influences to pull from, I think would be incredibly powerful, compositionally, but especially for sound design from the ground up. One of the reasons I think The Astonishing was so excellent was because of the depth of expression an orchestra adds to the relatively flat dynamics of metal guitar and drums. It makes the sonic texture far more interesting and actually three-dimensional. The three-dimensional sound can even be accomplished with just a metal ensemble, but it usually requires a more simplified gain structure and signal chain, allowing the performances to be more naked and vulnerable, bringing back some of the dynamic range. Broadening your frame of reference on how people emotionally respond to different timbres and sound envelopes of tones could open up so many awesome possibilities for Dream Theater. So when I made my video talking about Mike Portnoy's return, I was really excited. I was hoping Mike would add a little more of that X factor that seems to have been missing for a while. And as you can tell by my review of this album thus far, I don't really think we got that X factor. Mike has said he doesn't have a producer credit like he did on past records. Maybe that has something to do with it. For some reason, I'm doubtful. If I had to pick the one thing that I think hurts this album's production the most, I'd probably say it's how they used bus compression. I don't feel like the mix breathes and has depth. Everything is glued well together, but nothing feels like it's punching me in the face or ripping my face off. The transients feel a bit softened and the guitar tone has a little bit of a flat dynamic response. Compare this album's production to something that's not even metal, Wicked Stone by Slash. That master is slammed, super hot, but it's super punchy. Awesome sounding drums and a guitar with some serious grip. This is not hard for Dream Theater to accomplish, even if they wanted to use the same tones they did on this album. Let's quickly look at lyrics and vocals. They aren't great. I personally love James LaBrie. His voice is obnoxious, but that's kind of what I love about it. It's instantly identifiable. I totally understand people who hate his voice, but the man is clearly technically excellent vocalist. His style of singing is very bizarre yet pure, and it's a way he can maintain the longevity of his voice over this many years. I have to admire him for that and for his discipline to mostly stick to it. But unfortunately, I think age is catching up to him. He didn't perform terribly. It wasn't embarrassing or anything. It just doesn't have the captivating confidence that it used to. Listen to the albums from even just 10 years ago, and you'll hear a pretty substantial difference. The top lines mostly feel secondary to everything else, and Dream Theater admits as much.
With Dream Theater, it's always been music first. We write the music instrumentally. And then we sit down, like for instance with this album in particular, once the music was done, then we got together and we did like a melody writing session where we, you know, John, myself, Jordan, and James just sat there and went through every song and la da 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 da. And then once we established the melodies and kind of, you know, just do gibberish phrasings and melodies, then from there we figure who's going to write the lyrics, split up the lyrics, and then the lyrics are written from there.
All right.
So most of the times it works out.
Yeah.
Because as we're writing the music, we do know, like, this is a vocal section.
Yeah.
This is the chorus. This, you know, so it's kind of, it might lend itself to being more melodic, but every once in a while it bites us in the ass. There were a couple of songs on the album where we were like stuck on like, where the music was already done, and we were like, man, why do we do that? Like, you know, there's no way this is going to work for a vocal. You know, we should go back and change it, but at that point it's too late. And then we've really got to work extra hard on making the vocals sound natural. You know, maybe it's like just a weird combination of time signatures or the rhythm motif is too complicated. How the hell is anybody going to sing this? But, you know, you get to it.
This isn't a bad way of approaching music. There are a ton of ways of making really engaging music. And like Portnoy said in this same interview, it's still possible to craft a captivating top line when it's the last thing you write. But I can tell you firsthand and from experience of many of my friends, it certainly makes things a lot harder. I think it's plain to say that top line was an afterthought on this record. I wouldn't say there are any magical or captivating vocal moments on this album as well. Lyrically, I'm on the verge of hating it. The overuse of the following words pissed me off. Using the word dream and then rhyming it with scream, the word night, the word break, darkness, eyes. I get it's a concept record and there will be unifying themes across all the songs, but this is a little ridiculous. Between that and the use of so many lyrical cliches, it really makes me kind of cringe. Like, I really enjoyed the instrumental for Bend the Clock, but one line after another is a lyrical cliche, like from top to bottom. Lyrics are hard, probably my least favorite thing to have to write, but they can ruin a song if they aren't done well. Even songs where the music is the focus. So the question becomes, is Parasomnia good? Well, let's evaluate its goodness. I came up with 6 metrics of goodness to evaluate music with. First is taste, the most subjective and fickle of all the metrics. I like Dream Theater, and this album sounds very much like the Dream Theater I know and love. So you'd think immediately, yes, this does fit Mike's taste. But taste, like many other things, is contextual. If I hadn't heard any other Dream Theater music before, maybe this would light me on fire. However, I've listened extensively to Dream Theater and have preconceptions for my expectations of the band and how they develop over time. For that reason, I would say, no, this does not align with my taste. Let's look at the utility of the music. Outside of existing Dream Theater fans who really wanted to hear Mike Portnoy play with Dream Theater again, a niche within a micro niche, I can't really tell who or what this is for. Is it for prog nerds? Sure, there's an audience of guys who worship Yes and Rush and look down on most things that don't fall into that sound. So the utility is perceived self-importance. I think far better of Dream Theater than to believe that's why they made this record. So what is the intended utility? I think it was just for them to make music they like playing, honestly. And like, that's fine, but that's also a very narrow evaluation of music's utility. It seems like the intent was to tell fans that Mike Portnoy joined the band again, for dudes who care deeply about that sort of thing. I guess in that sense, I can see the utility of it, though that same thing can be accomplished by making a social media post. If we decontextualize the music from the band for a moment, who and what is this for? I really couldn't tell you offhand, so I'm going to give this a question mark. I don't know how to evaluate the utility of this. Let's take a look at it definitionally. This does work definitionally both as music and as a Dream Theater record. I'd argue it kind of fits too cleanly into the latter. At this stage of Western society, I wouldn't say it really changes any existing definitions of music. For anyone who is familiar with prog metal or rock, this is not challenging at all. So from a definitional standpoint, I'd put it solidly in good. Let's examine it from a psychological perspective. I'm sure there are plenty of Dream Theater fanboys who will have their cognitive dissonances relieved by getting more of the same and because of the return of Mike Portnoy. That is more of a fleeting instant dopamine hit. I'm very curious to know how much staying power this album will have. Honestly, I'm very curious to know how much staying power the last two albums are going to have as well. The staying power, the longevity of its relevance, speaks to how it psychologically fills a need in its audience. Does it consistently bring them closer to fulfillment and meaning? Does it resolve existing cognitive dissonances? Does it drive the mind more towards synthesis? Does it consistently do this over many years? There is obviously immediately an audience for this, but I'm a little skeptical as to how long that audience is going to stick around. Maybe I'm too close to the subject to be able to objectively evaluate, but my gut is telling me, no, this is not psychologically very good. It isn't psychologically detrimental, but I'm skeptical that after the honeymoon has worn off, that people will be coming back to this album versus anything else that's on the market, even from Dream Theater's own catalog. Let's look at the aesthetic goodness of the album. Aesthetically, on a fundamental level, there's some interesting stuff here. If you decontextualize what I know of Dream Theater from the music and just isolate it by itself, there's some really cool ideas here. The only thing I'd say that rises to the level of aesthetic poverty is the lyrics, but we've already gone over that. In that sense, the whole album is aesthetically good. There's a notable unity of form, there is beauty, there is order, counterpointed with chaos, attempting to point towards a greater, more beautiful order. But I could say the same thing about many other average albums. Aesthetically, in context of the band, it's overly familiar. People change over time. Mike Portnoy himself remarked about how the band as individuals have matured over this time, coming back together now. When you get art that's very samey over the years, there's perceived stagnation. An important element to all artists is evolution. It's part of that living, breathing characteristic in art that people love being able to touch and being touched by. For me, it kind of feels like Dream Theater has been in a bit of a holding pattern the last few years now, aesthetically speaking. There hasn't been a, dare I say, dramatic turn of events. That perceived stagnation, again, takes away from the element of surprise. This personal evaluation is all well and good, but let's look at it through some more specific aesthetic lenses. From an emotivist perspective, I mean, it makes you feel emotions. If I was a fresh listener, I'd think it's pretty freaking neat. Emotivism is too heavy on subjectivity, though, so I consider it to be one of the more base ways of evaluating music. It ain't hard to make a sound that makes you feel something. From a romantic mimesis perspective, I'd say it mostly accurately communicates like real human emotions and experiences. However, I'd challenge that it doesn't do so significantly enough towards the artist's intent. Petrucci and Portnoy talked a lot about how Parasomnia is supposed to be about different forms of parasomnia, and you were supposed to feel like you were in a dream, or more specifically, a nightmare. I really didn't get that too often from the music. The music was very grandiose and tried to be cinematic. That can play well towards communicating a larger meta meaning in a unified narrative. The issue becomes Dream Theater kind of wants it both ways. They, on one hand, want it to be grand and cinematic. They want to communicate a larger meta meaning that unifies all the meanings of the individual tracks, but they also want to keep it just loosely about weird, creepy sleep stuff and have no overarching narrative, no overarching message or moral. That is what we call a classic case of dissonance. You have this emotional signal of grandeur pointing you towards something very meaningful and important, but the moment you peer beneath the surface, it's just a bit of a mess. The order is mostly surface level deep. The order doesn't go deeper or have stronger unifying roots. You could sum the album up as Parasomnia is weird, isn't it? Sure, that's an observation, but it's still on the lower end of the hierarchies of abstract concepts and doesn't emotionally or semantically update my existing model of the concept. More accurately, parasomnia, sleep in the unconscious, are extremely abstract, but the questions they ask about it and the observations they make about it don't do justice to how messed up and mysterious they actually are. And, you know, using the term mysterious actually makes me realize how much they failed with the aesthetics of mystery. That was one of the terms that I used to describe Opeth's last will and testament. I think they elicited mystery very well. This album had as much mystery as performing a mammogram on a nude beach. So from a romantic mimesis perspective, I'd argue it actually fails. On a very surface level, you could argue maybe there's some Jungian archetypes at play lyrically. Maybe if I wanted to stretch that term musically, but that's being very generous. To be fair to Dream Theater, on a surface level, I would say the aesthetics are good. However, the moment you look an inch deeper, they kind of fall apart. I would not call the aesthetics great. Let's look at the moral goodness of the album. This is a fairly simple analysis. There's really not much morally challenging by any means on this record. I mean, whether from my Catholic perspective or really any other mainstream moral frame of mind. It's just kind of looking at something that's creepy and weird and saying, hey, ain't that creepy and weird? It doesn't celebrate any antagonists. I'm unsure if there are any real protagonists. There's nothing scandalous to speak of. Again, from my perspective and really from anyone who isn't insane, it's morally fine. So overall, I'd say the album is technically good, though colloquially, I would call it mid. Do you guys remember when Dream Theater was special? Dream Theater was a treat for me. Anytime a new album was being released, I'd pre-order. I was so excited for a novel, mind-changing experience. And I think a lot of fans felt the same way. Any of the fans celebrating this album are not celebrating it because it's new Dream Theater. They're celebrating it because it's more Dream Theater. Does that make sense? Dream Theater have never had the best album art, but you could tell someone took the time to craft it and there was some intention behind it. They had something they wanted to say, even if they didn't quite have the precision to pull it off elegantly. On this album, they used AI extensively for the visuals. On the album itself, the single art, and even in the music videos. There's some people who have questions about the ethics of AI. For the sake of argument, I'm just setting that aside. What we can say about AI is that it usually doesn't feel special. We haven't quite quantified why yet, but it hits the uncanny valley pretty hard. It's appealing on a surface level, but it's missing what people describe as that human element. The music on this album lacked that special human element to me. It lacked an honest signal. It lacked a passion to need to communicate something desperately. I can hear the passion of the individuals enjoying themselves playing instruments. I can hear in interviews that they were being honest with themselves, but doing something sincerely is not the only component to communicating an honest signal by musical anthropological standards anyway. Take Rich Men Down in Richmond, for example. It has a fraction of the notes, a fraction of the technical talent. It's not why the song exploded. It was a perfect unity of aesthetics at the right time. It spoke to a condition that many people resonated with deeper than the words or even the music itself. It felt like someone desperate calling out to other people who were also desperate. In Dream Theater's case, on their previous records, there were people starving for unity of metal and prog that hadn't been done before, and they kept pushing the envelope of the possibilities of that sound for decades. This album did not follow that same adventure into the unknown. It didn't come back from a period of uncertainty and chaos with the spoils of discovery. This album rested in its hobbit hole with the comforts of home. Dream Theater are not only exceedingly accomplished beyond what almost anyone will be, but they are advancing in age. I don't say that dismissively, I actually say that with honor. At this point in their lives and in their careers, they can do whatever they want. I'm happy they loved making this album. I'm happy there's a lot of people who are enjoying it, but being honest with the music and not how I feel about the men as individuals and as a group, I don't really think it's special anymore. I'd love to be shown otherwise on later records, but I'm leaning more towards just not caring. Those are my thoughts. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I love you all. God bless you.